The Arizona desert holds secrets buried deeper than most are willing to dig. In 1928, Nali Strongheart, an Apache widow with 3 hungry children, trades her last possessions, 3 aging horses, for a dusty, forgotten farm. The land whispers of ancestors, but offers little else. No crops will grow without water, and the ancient well has run dry. With calloused hands and quiet determination, Nali begins to drill. The earth beneath her farm doesn't just hold water, it guards history. When the ground suddenly collapses, revealing a hidden chamber filled with gold coins and sacred tribal artifacts, Nali's struggle to survive becomes something far more dangerous. What will she sacrifice to protect what was never truly lost, only waiting to be found? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wooden chair creaked as Nali Strongheart lowered herself onto the porch of what was now her home. A home, she thought with bitter irony, that might be the death of them all. She watched her children explore the barren yard, Keem, her eldest at 16, already assessing what repairs the dilapidated barn might need. 12-year-old Ayana collecting interesting stones, and little Tarak, only 8, chasing a lizard through the sparse desert brush. 2 years since Hinto had died in that mining accident. 2 years of struggling, of selling their possessions one by one, of enduring the sideways glances from townspeople who made it clear that Apache widows weren't welcome in their community. "Mama, look!" Tarak called, holding up the lizard he'd somehow managed to catch. His smile, so like his father's, pierced Nali's heart. For him alone, she would make this work. She fingered the small beaded medicine pouch hidden in her dress pocket. Inside was a pinch of soil from the ancestral lands her grandmother had shown her as a child. The land of her people before reservations and broken treaties, before everything changed. "This place is dead," Keem said, joining her on the porch. At 16, he carried himself like a man, shoulders squared beneath the weight of responsibilities that had come too soon. "It has water beneath it," Nali replied. "Old Joseph wouldn't have traded otherwise." Keem's expression darkened. 3 horses for this? We could have sold them in Tucson. "For how much? Enough to feed us for a month? Then what?" Nali stood, her work-worn hands resting on her hips. "This land is ours now. We can grow food, build something. If we don't starve first," Keme muttered. Ayana approached, her hands cupped around something. "Mama, I found this in a crack in the wall." She opened her palms to reveal a small beaded pouch, similar to Nali's own but much older, the leather cracked with age. Nali took it carefully. The beadwork pattern, she recognized it immediately. The medicine symbol of her mother's clan. She glanced around the property with new eyes. Had her people been here before? Was it coincidence that old Joseph had offered her this particular plot of land? That night, after the children slept on blankets spread across the rough wooden floor, Nali slipped outside. The desert night was cool, stars scattered across the sky like the silver beads on her grandmother's ceremonial dress. She opened both medicine Pushesha own and the one Ayana had found and compared them in the moonlight. The patterns were undeniably connected, family patterns, protective symbols. Nali knelt in the dirt, pressing both pouches into the earth. "Ancestors," she whispered in Apache, "I hear you. Guide me. Help me feed my children. Help me make this place live again." A coyote called in the distance, its lonely cry echoing across the empty land. Nali closed her eyes, remembering Hinto's laugh, his strong hands, the way he'd promised to build her a proper home someday. She remembered, too, her grandmother's stories of hidden places, of treasures the Spanish had never found, of knowledge the white men could never understand. "I traded our last horses for this land," she told the night. "Show me it wasn't a mistake." The wind picked up, sending dust swirling around her kneeling form. In that moment, Nali felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope. Small and fragile as a desert flower, but present nonetheless. She returned to the house, sliding the older pouch into a space between the floorboards near where she slept. Whatever secrets this farm held, she would uncover them. For her children, for survival. Tomorrow, they would begin digging for water. Dawn broke over the farm with unforgiving clarity, revealing every crack in the adobe walls, every missing shingle, every patch of parched earth that hadn't felt water in years. Nali rose before the children, determined to make a thorough assessment of their new home. The main house consisted of 2 rooms, barely enough space for 4 people. The barn leaned precariously to one side. A chicken coop stood empty, its wire rusted through in places. And everywhere, dust and neglect. "Place hasn't been lived in for 20 years, came a gruff voice. Nali turned to find an old white man leaning on a fence post at the edge of her property. His weathered face spoke of decades under the Arizona sun. "I'm Elmer Jackson. My place is over that ridge." He nodded eastward. "Figured I should warn you." "About what?" Nali asked, immediately wary. "This land. It's cursed. Strange things happen here." His pale eyes narrowed. "Last family that tried to make a go of it left after 3 months. Man went crazy, claimed he heard voices in the night." Before Nali could respond, Kemi emerged from the house. Jackson straightened, nodded curtly, and walked away. "Who was that?" Kemi asked, coming to stand beside his mother. "A neighbor, with warnings about our cursed land." She smiled wryly. By midday, the children had explored every corner of the property. Tarak had claimed an old tool shed as his fort, while Ayana meticulously catalogued every plant she found growing wild. "Mama," Ayana called from inside the house. "Come look what we found." Nali entered to find her daughter and Kime kneeling by a loose floorboard they'd pried up. Beneath it was a small metal box. "We haven't opened it yet," Keme said, handling her the rusted container. Inside lay a faded parchment, carefully folded. Nali spread it on the flora map, drawn in faded ink. She recognized the mountain ridge to the east, the curve of what must be the dry creek bed beyond their property. But the map showed waterways where none existed now, landmarks labeled in flowing Spanish script. "What is it?" Ayana asked, peering over her shoulder. "A very old map," Nali replied, tracing the faded lines, "from when the Spanish were here." A knock at the door interrupted them. Kame quickly folded the map and slid it into Nali's hands as she rose to answer. An elderly Apache man stood on their porch, his face deeply lined, eyes sharp despite his advanced years. "I am Makya," he said in their native tongue. "Elder of the Red Mountain Band. Word reached me that Joseph sold this place to one of our own." Nali invited him in, offering the only chair they possessed. As the children brought water, she noticed how Makya's gaze traveled the room, lingering on certain corners, certain shadows. "You know this place," she said. It wasn't a question. Makya nodded slowly. "This land has history. Apache history." He tapped his walking stick on the floor. "Before the white men came, before the Spanish, our people had ceremonies here." "Because of the water?" Nali asked, thinking of the map. Makya's eyes sharpened with interest. "You know about the water?" Hesitantly, Nali showed him the map. The elder studied it in silence, his weathered fingers tracing the waterways. "The Spanish found what our people had always known," he finally said. "Water flows beneath this land, sacred water." He looked up at Nali. "The settlers who built this house dug their well in the wrong place. They found only enough to survive, not enough to thrive." "And you think we can find more?" Keme asked, hope edging his voice. "Perhaps." Makya handed the map back to Nali. "But water is not the only thing buried here." He rose to leave, but paused at the door. "Be careful what you dig for, Nali Strongheart. Some things are buried for a reason." After he left, the family stood in silence until Tarak spoke up. "Is our farm really cursed, Mama?" Nali knelt before her youngest. "No, but it has secrets." She looked at the map again, at the Spanish words scrawled in one corner. "Aquí descansa el tesoro perdido." Here lies the lost treasure. And we're going to find them. A week of back-breaking labor had yielded little progress. The old well, a stone-lined shaft behind the house, descended 30 feet into hard-packed earth without a drop of water. According to the Spanish map, they needed to dig elsewhere near the twisted mesquite tree at the property's southern edge. "This is where the underground stream should meet," Nali explained, marking the spot. She and Keem had been taking turns with their single pickaxe since dawn. The sun now hung directly overhead, merciless in its heat. "Let me try again," Keme said, reaching for the tool. Nali surrendered it, wiping sweat from her brow. They'd managed to dig down about 6 feet, creating a rough circle 8 feet in diameter. The work was slow, the earth unyielding. "We need more help," she admitted. "The townspeople won't help us," Kem replied bitterly, bringing the pickaxe down with force. The sound that followed wasn't the expected thud of metal striking earth. Instead, a hollow crack echoed upward. Keme froze. "What was that?" Nali asked, moving to the edge of their excavation. Keme struck again, more carefully. Another crack. "There's something under here," he said. "Wood, maybe?" They worked faster now, clearing dirt away from what appeared to be wooden planks. Old, weathered wood that shouldn't have been buried 6 feet underground. "It looks like a trap door," Nali said, brushing away decades of compacted soil. They had uncovered about half of the wooden structure when Ayana called from above. "Someone's coming." Nali climbed out to see a sleek black automobile approaching on the dirt road. It pulled up beside their modest homestead, and a well-dressed white man emerged, brushing invisible dust from his suit. "Mrs. Strongheart," he called. "Harrison Weller, Copper Canyon Bank." He approached with a practiced smile. "I was passing by and thought I'd introduce myself." Nali doubted anyone just passed by their remote location. "What can I help you with, Mr. Weller?" His eyes drifted to the excavation where Kame remained. "Digging a new well? Smart. This land has," he hesitated, "interesting water rights attached to it." "How would you know about our land?" Nali asked. "Banking business, Mrs. Strongheart. I handle property transactions throughout the county." His smile never reached his eyes. "Actually, I'm surprised Joseph sold to you. I've been trying to acquire this parcel for some time." Before Nali could respond, a tremendous cracking sound came from the pit, followed by Kame's startled cry. She turned to see the wooden structure collapsing beneath her son, dirt and debris raining down. "Keme!" She rushed to the edge. Where her son had stood was now a dark opening, dirt still tumbling into unseen depths. "I'm okay, Mother." Keme's voice echoed up from below. "But you need to see this." Weller was suddenly beside her, staring down with undisguised interest. "What, in heaven's name?" Ignoring him, Nali lowered herself into the hole. The wooden structure had indeed been a trapdoor, now partially collapsed into the space beneath. Kime stood on solid ground about 8 feet below the opening, illuminated by the shaft of sunlight from above. "Look," he whispered as she joined him. The space was man-made, its walls reinforced with timber and stone. It extended into darkness beyond the reach of the sunlight. But what captured Nali's attention was the gleam of metal on the floor, where dirt had fallen away, gold coins scattered like seeds. And propped against one wall, catching the light, stood an ornate golden cross studded with turquoise stones. Spanish craftsmanship, but with unmistakable Apache symbols worked into its design. "We have to tell someone," Keme said, his voice hushed. Above them, Weller called down. "Everything all right? Need any help?" Nali grabbed her son's arm. "No," she whispered. "We tell no one." She looked up at the banker's silhouette against the sky, especially not him. Understanding dawned in Keme's eyes. He nodded, then called up, "Just a small cave, nothing interesting." But as they climbed out, the cross's image remained burned in Nali's mind. She recognized those symbols. They matched the patterns on her grandmother's medicine pouch. This was no random Spanish treasure. This was something that belonged to her people. And now, to her. After ushering the banker away with vague promises to consider his sudden offer to buy their property, Nali and Kime worked frantically to secure the entrance to the underground chamber. They constructed a crude wooden cover, disguising it with dirt and brush. "No one enters without both of us present." Nali instructed her children that evening, her voice low despite the isolation of their farm. "Not even each other, not even Elder Makia, not yet." "But Mama, the gold," Tarak began, eyes wide with excitement. "Is dangerous," she finished firmly. "More dangerous than rattlesnakes." That night, after the children slept, Nali slipped out alone. The quarter moon provided just enough light to find her way back to the hidden entrance. She removed the covering and lowered herself into the chamber. The cross gleamed in the lantern light she had brought, its gold surface catching and multiplying the flame. Nali set the lantern down and explored further than she and Keme had ventured earlier. The chamber extended about 30 feet in one direction, its earthen walls reinforced with timbers that had somehow withstood the centuries. Shelves carved directly into the dirt walls held pottery, bundles of what might have been dried, herbs now turned to dust, and several small wooden boxes. Nali opened one box cautiously. Inside lay a circle of beaten copper, a medallion or coin of some kind, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. The next box contained similar objects, some in silver, some in gold. It was the third box that made her breath catch. It contained a shield small, the size that would be carried by a young warrior, but unmistakably Apache in design. The painted symbols represented her mother's clanth, the same symbols that appeared on her medicine pouch. Nali ran her fingers over the shield's surface, feeling the raised patterns. This was not Spanish treasure. This was Apache heritage, hidden away for safekeeping. But why here? And why mixed with Spanish artifacts? A noise from above startled her. Nali extinguished her lantern immediately, plunging the chamber into darkness. Footsteps crunched on the ground overhead. She held her breath, the shield clutched to her chest. "Mrs. Strongheart," a man's voice called. "Sheriff Blackwood, just making my rounds." Nali remained silent, unmoving in the darkness. What was the county sheriff doing on her property at night? "Saw your lantern light from the ridge," he continued, his footsteps moving closer to the hidden entrance. "Everything all right out here? It's mighty late for digging." She would have to answer or risk raising suspicion. Carefully placing the shield back in its box, Nali climbed the crude ladder they'd fashioned and pushed aside the covering. "Sheriff," she acknowledged, emerging as if from the house rather than the ground. "Is there a problem?" Sheriff Blackwood was a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that missed little. "No problem, ma'am. Just checking. Got word you folks were digging for water. Any luck?" "Not yet," Nali replied evenly. "The wells run dry." He nodded, though his gaze drifted past her to the covered excavation site. "Heard Harrison Weller paid you a visit today. News travels fast." "Small county." He adjusted his hat. "Mr. Weller has been interested in this property for some time. Curious why old Joseph never sold to him. Perhaps Joseph didn't like his offer." The sheriff's mouth twitched. "Perhaps." He turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Strongheart, if you find anything unusual while digging, county law requires reporting it." "Unusual?" Nali kept her expression neutral. "Historical artifacts, Indian relics, that sort of thing." His eyes were unreadable in the darkness. "This area has a complex history." After he departed, Nali returned to the chamber and retrieved the shield. She needed to speak with Elder Makia, but cautiously. The sheriff's late-night visit was no coincidence, nor was Weller's sudden appearance. Word had spread. But how? She and Kame had told no one. Nali carried the shield back to the house, concealing it beneath the loose floorboard where they'd found the map. Tomorrow she would seek out the elders' council. Tonight she would guard her children and their discovery with the vigilance of her warrior ancestors. Because war, she was certain, was coming to their doorstep. Dawn found Nali already on the road to Elder Makia's home, the shield wrapped carefully in her shawl. The old man lived in a modest dwelling at the edge of the small Apache settlement, 5 miles from her farm. Few of her people remained in the area. Most had been forced onto reservations farther south, but Makia had somehow maintained his ancestral claim to this small patch of land. She found him outside, tending a small garden of traditional medicinal plants. "I wondered when you would come," he said without turning, as if he'd been expecting her. Nali unwrapped the shield. "This was in the chamber beneath our farm." Makia's gnarled hands trembled slightly as he took the shield. "The Guardian's shield," he murmured. "My grandfather spoke of it, but I thought it lost during the wars." "There's more," Nali said. "Spanish artifacts, gold, and a cross with our symbols worked into it." The elder nodded slowly. "The alliance." "What alliance?" Before Makia could answer, a dust cloud in the distance announced an approaching automobile. "Not here," he said quickly, returning the shield. Come to the ceremonial ground tonight. Bring only Keme. When Nali returned home, she found an unfamiliar automobile parked outside their farmhouse. A scholarly-looking white man in spectacles was examining their property, making notes in a small book. "Can I help you?" she called, immediately wary. The man turned with a practiced smile. "Ah, Mrs. Strongheart, I presume. Professor Daniel Whitman, State Historical Society." He extended his hand, which Nali didn't take. Undeterred, he continued, "I'm documenting early settlement structures in the county. Your property has quite an interesting provenance." "It's just an old farm," Nali replied, moving toward the house where she could see Ayana watching from the window. "Oh, it's far more than that," Whitman said, following. "Did you know this area was the site of significant Spanish activity in the 1700s? Several expeditions came through, looking for gold and other treasures." Something in his tone made Nali turn. "Professor, my children and I have work to do. If you're finished with your documentation—" Of course, of course." He handed her a card. "Please contact me if you come across anything of historical interest. The society pays well for significant finds." As he drove away, Keme emerged from the barn. "Another visitor?" "They're circling like vultures," Nali replied. Inside, Ayana was sitting at their small table with a leather-bound book. "The professor gave me this," she said. "It's a journal from a Spanish soldier." Nali took the book, alarm growing as she flipped through pages of faded Spanish script. The journal was clearly authenticant, clearly meant to pique their interest. "Can you read it?" Kime asked. "Some." Nali had learned Spanish as a child from a missionary who'd thought he was saving her soul. "It mentions Apache territories and treasure." That afternoon brought yet another visitor, a stern-faced government man who introduced himself as Thomas Reynolds from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. "Mrs. Strongheart, I'm here to inform you that any Native American artifacts found on private property must be reported to the Bureau," he stated without preamble. "We haven't found any artifacts," Nali replied evenly. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "Information suggests otherwise. The government has an interest in preserving the cultural heritage of indigenous peoples. By taking it away from them?" Keem asked sharply. Reynolds ignored him. "I'll be staying in town for several days. I expect your cooperation." He handed Nali an official-looking document. "This outlines your legal obligations." That night, after leaving Ayana and Tarak with instructions to bar the door, Nali and Kime slipped out to meet Elder Makia. They found him at the ceremonial ground, a circular clearing surrounded by ancient junipers. "The shield confirms what I suspected," Makia said after performing a blessing ceremony. "During the Spanish incursions, a unique alliance formed between certain Apache leaders and Spanish priests who had broken with their military escorts." "An alliance?" Keme asked skeptically. "The priests wanted to protect sacred objects from being melted down for gold. Our ancestors wanted to preserve ceremonial items from those who would destroy our ways." Makia's eyes reflected the firelight. "Together, they created hidden chambers throughout these lands." "But why our farm?" Nali asked. "Because," Makia said gravely, "it sits upon the entrance to the largest chamber of alone that contains not just gold, but the sacred history of our people." Returning from the ceremonial ground, Nali and Keme found Tarak waiting anxiously by the window. "Someone was here," the boy whispered as they entered. "They tried the door, but Ayana wedged the chair against it like you showed us." Nali's blood ran cold. "Did you see who it was?" Tarak shook his head. "Too dark. But they went around to the back of the house after." A quick check revealed nothing missing, but fresh boot prints circled the property and led directly to the hidden chamber entrance. The covering had been disturbed, though apparently not enough to reveal what lay beneath. "We need help," Nali admitted, looking at Kema. "We can't guard this place day and night ourselves." By morning, she had made her decision. Elder Makia arrived with 3 trusted men from the settlement veterans who had fought in the Great War and returned to find their people's situation unchanged despite their service. "The chamber must be documented before others find it," Makia explained as the small group gathered around Nali's kitchen table. "If we can prove these artifacts belong to our tribe, we may have legal standing. And if we can't," Kemi asked. One of the veterans, a man named Chaitan, spoke up. Then we move them, hide them again where only our people know. Nali shook her head. There's too much, and the chamber itself might be important. First we must see everything, Makia said decisively. They descended into the chamber as a group. With more lanterns, the full extent of the hidden vault became clear. It extended farther than Nali had initially explored, with small alcoves cut into the walls. Each contained different types of artifacts, some clearly Apache, others Spanish, and some that seemed to be a fusion of both cultures. In one such alcove, Chaitan discovered a silver bowl, its surface etched with Apache ceremonial symbols. The blessing bowl, Makia breathed, taking it reverently, used to prepare sacred waters during naming ceremonies. My grandmother spoke of this being hidden during the last great raid. As they catalogued the chamber's contents, Ayana kept watch above ground. Around midday, she called down urgently. Nali climbed up to find Harrison Weller approaching again, this time accompanied by two rough-looking men. Mrs. Strongheart, Weller called with false joviality. I've brought some associates who specialize in water location. Thought they might assist you. Nali stepped forward, blocking the path to the hidden entrance. Behind her, she knew Chaitan and the others were quietly emerging, concealing the entrance once more. That's very thoughtful, Mr. Weller, but we've already located water, she replied smoothly. Weller's smile tightened. Have you indeed? How fortunate. His eyes tracked the men emerging from behind the house but betrayed no surprise. I see you have help already. Our people help each other, Elder Makia said, joining Nali. The three veterans positioned themselves strategically around the property. One of Weller's men muttered something, his hand drifting toward his jacket. Chaitan stepped forward, his military bearing unmistakable. The man thought better of whatever he'd been planning. After an uncomfortable silence, Weller tipped his hat. Well then, I'll leave you to it. My offer to purchase still stands. In fact, I'm prepared to double it. This land isn't for sale, Nali stated firmly. After Weller departed, Makia performed a blessing ceremony with the silver bowl, mixing sacred herbs with water from their meager supply. This bowl has power, he explained. It was used by our medicine people for generations before being hidden away. That evening, a surprise visitor arrived, Mrs. Collins, the town librarian, a white woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, she said when Nali answered her knock. But I believe you should see these. She produced a stack of yellowed documents, land grants and surveys dating back to the 1860s. Your property has a complicated legal history. Mrs. Collins explained. When I heard Professor Whitman asking questions about it, I grew concerned. He's not just a historian, acquires artifacts for private collectors. Why would you help us? Kemi asked suspiciously. Mrs. Collins smiled sadly. My grandmother was Cherokee. I know something about stolen heritage. She pointed to one document. This shows that your land was originally designated as Apache territory before being seized by the government. That might give you some legal standing if, she hesitated, if something of cultural significance were found there. After she left, Nali realized their circle of allies and enemies was growing clearer. The question was whether they had enough of the former to protect against the latter. That night, Tarak woke screaming from a nightmare. Men were taking our treasure, he sobbed. They were taking everything away. Nali held him close, fearing his dream might soon become reality. With Chaitan and the other veterans taking turns keeping watch, Nali, Kemi, and Elder Makia spent the next 2 days carefully exploring the chamber. What they initially thought was a single room proved to be merely the entrance to a larger complex. Look here, Kem said, examining the rear wall where several timbers had been arranged in an unusual pattern. These aren't supporting anything. When they removed one beam, they discovered a narrow passage extending deeper underground. Nali led the way, lantern held high, revealing a second chamber beyond. This one was smaller but more deliberately constructed, its walls lined with fitted stone rather than packed earth. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and upon it lay a tablet approximately 2 feet square, carved from a single piece of reddish stone. Its surface was covered with symbols, some recognizably Apache, others unknown. The guidance stone, Makia whispered, his voice echoing in the small space. I thought it only a legend. Nali approached slowly. What does it say? I cannot read all of it. These are ancient forms of our writing, from before the Spanish came. Makia traced certain symbols reverently. But here these speak of star patterns, and here the sacred mountains to the north. A map? Keem suggested. Perhaps, or instructions. Makia pointed to a series of interconnected symbols. These represent seasonal alignments when certain stars appear above specific landmarks. Their examination was interrupted by Ayana's warning call from above. They quickly retreated to the main chamber, concealing the passage behind them. They emerged to find Agent Reynolds standing in their yard, accompanied by two men carrying surveying equipment. Mrs. Strongheart, he greeted her coldly, I've brought archaeologists from the university to examine your property. I don't recall giving permission for any examination, Nali replied. Reynolds produced an official-looking document. This authorizes us to survey any land suspected of containing significant archaeological materials, particularly those related to indigenous cultures. Those are our cultures, Kem said angrily, our history, which the government is committed to preserving, Reynolds countered smoothly. Inappropriate institutions. Before Nali could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Professor Whitman arrived in his automobile, followed by Sheriff Blackwood on horseback. What's all this? The sheriff asked, surveying the growing crowd on Nali's property. Federal business, Sheriff, Reynolds replied, dismissively. On county land, Blackwood countered, dismounting. I'll need to see those papers. As the men argued jurisdiction, Nali noticed Harrison Weller watching from the road, binoculars raised. The banker made no attempt to hide his surveillance. That evening, after the unwelcome visitors had been temporarily turned away by Sheriff Blackwood's insistence on proper permits, Nali experienced something strange. While sitting alone by the farmhouse window, exhaustion overtook her. In the twilight state between waking and sleeping, vivid images flashed through her mind. The tablet, the stars, the mountains, all connected by lines of light. She saw people Apache ancestors and Spanish priests working together to conceal something of tremendous importance. She jolted awake to find Elder Makia watching her with knowing eyes. You've been touched by the visions, he said quietly. The artifacts are speaking to you. What does it mean? Nali asked. It means you are connected to this place in ways even I did not realize. He sat beside her. When we examined the tablet today, I recognized certain clan markings your clan, Nali. Your ancestors were guardians of these sacred objects. But why mix them with Spanish treasures? Protection through confusion, Makia explained. The Spanish priests who broke faith with their conquering brothers needed to hide their religious objects. Our people needed to preserve our ceremonial items. Together, they created hiding places that neither side would think to look places that combined both cultures. And the tablet? What is its purpose? I believe it contains directions to what, I'm not certain, but combined with the Spanish journal and the map you found. He shook his head. We must decipher it before the others force their way in. Later that night, Nali overheard Tarak telling Ayana about a dream of a stone tablet glowing with light, pointing the way to the heart of all treasures. Nali clutched the beaded medicine pouch at her neck. The visions, her son's dreams, the mounting pressure from outsiders, everything was accelerating toward something momentous. She only hoped they would be ready when it came. The county courthouse in Copper Canyon stood as a monument to American authority, a grand stone edifice amid the modest buildings of the small desert town. Nali felt its weight as she climbed the steps, Kima and Elder Makia beside her. Mrs. Collins waited inside, clutching a leather portfolio. I've brought everything I could find, she whispered as they entered the hearing room. Judge Harlan Matthews presided from his elevated bench, his expression stern beneath bushy white eyebrows. The room was already crowded. Agent Reynolds and his archaeologists sat at one table, Professor Whitman at another. Harrison Weller had secured himself a prominent position near the front. This informal hearing will address the matter of archaeological findings on the Strongheart property, Judge Matthews announced. This is not a trial, merely a determination of how to proceed under county and federal statutes. Reynolds rose first, presenting his case that any Native American artifacts found on private property were subject to federal oversight. These items represent national heritage, he argued. They belong in the Smithsonian or a similar institution, not hidden away or worse, sold to private collectors. When Whitman spoke, his academic demeanor seemed calculated to impress. The historical significance cannot be overstated. Spanish colonial artifacts intermingled with Native American objects represent a unique archaeological context. The site must be properly excavated by trained professionals. Weller's argument was more direct. Property rights are the foundation of our society. If valuable items are found on private land, they belong to the landowner, who may then choose to sell the land and its contents to interested parties. His eyes flickered to Nali. When Nali's turn came, Mrs. Collins handed her a worn leather folder. "Show them these first," she murmured. Nali approached the judge's bench and opened the folder to reveal yellow documents with faded official seals. "Your Honor, these are the original land grant papers from 1867, designating this area as Apache territory under the treaty signed that year." She laid them out carefully. "And this is the subsequent reclassification in 1875 that illegally seized the land." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Matthews examined the documents closely. "Where did you obtain these, Mrs. Strongheart?" "From County Archives, Mrs. W.W. Collins interjected, stepping forward. "I'm the town librarian and county record keeper. These documents have been in our archives since they were executed." Reynolds stood. "Regardless of how the land was initially acquired, current law is clear about cultural artifacts." "Is it?" Sheriff Blackwood interrupted from the back of the room. "Because these artifacts weren't just hidden on Apache land, according to Mrs. Strongheart, they were hidden by Apaches. Her ancestors, specifically." Judge Matthews raised his hand for silence. "Mrs. Strongheart, do you have evidence of this connection?" Nali produced the warrior's shield and medicine pouch. "These bear the markings of my specific clan. Elder Makia can confirm their authenticity and significance." As the elderly Apache man testified about the artifact's connection to Nali's lineage, she observed the changing expressions around the room: Reynolds' frustration, Whitman's calculating interest, Weller's barely concealed anger. When all arguments had been presented, Judge Matthews cleared his throat. "This is a complex matter involving federal statutes, tribal rights, and private property considerations. I'm issuing a temporary ruling. Mrs. Strongheart will maintain possession of her property and any artifacts found thereon until a final determination can be made." He raised his hand as Reynolds began to protest. "However, to ensure proper handling of potentially significant historical materials, Agent Reynolds will be permitted to station an observer on the property. No artifacts are to be removed, sold, or altered until final disposition is determined." Outside the courthouse, Weller approached Nali. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "That judge is up for re-election next year. He won't risk alienating certain financial interests for long." "Is that a threat, Mr. Weller?" Sheriff Blackwood asked, appearing beside them. The banker forced a smile. "Merely an observation about political realities, Sheriff." As they drove back to the farm, Keem voiced what they all feared. "They'll never let us keep what we've found." "Perhaps we're not meant to keep it," Elder Makia replied. "Perhaps we're meant to protect it as our ancestors did." Nali thought of the stone tablet, still hidden in the second chamber, and the visions that had come to her. "We need to understand what we've found before they take it away," she said. "We need to decipher the tablet." That evening, the tribal council convened at Nali's farm, the first such gathering on that land in generations. As elders from scattered Apache communities arrived, Nali felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. This was no longer just about her family's survival, it was about her people's legacy, and she would not surrender it without a fight. The tribal council meeting continued late into the night. Elders from 5 Apache bands had gathered, some traveling hundreds of miles after receiving Makia's urgent message. They sat in a circle in Nali's yard under the stars, passing the ceremonial pipe, speaking in the old language. "The vault must be examined by those with the knowledge to understand it," declared a white-haired woman named Kanti, medicine woman of the Mountain Shadow Band, before the white men forced their way in. With Agent Reynolds scheduled to arrive the next morning to begin his observation, they had precious little time. Nali led the elders into the main chamber, then revealed the hidden passage to the second room where the stone tablet waited. The elders gathered around it in reverent silence. "I have seen something like this before," said Tomo, oldest of the gathered elders. "In the high mountains to the north, where our people would go for the summer hunts, there is a cave with similar markings." Kanti traced the symbols with gnarled fingers. "These are star patterns, sacred alignments." While the elders studied the tablet, Kame explored the second chamber more thoroughly. In a small alcove, partially hidden behind a fallen timber, he discovered a slender wooden object about 2 feet long, marked with notches and painted symbols. "Elder Makia," he called softly, "what is this?" The old man took the wooden stick carefully. "A counting stick," he breathed, "used by our ancestors to track the seasons and stars." His eyes widened as he held it alongside the tablet. "Look, the notches align with the star symbols." As the elders worked to decipher the combined messages of the tablet and counting stick, Nali felt a strange sensation like a humming in her bones. The visions returned, stronger now. She saw ancestors gathering on this very spot, saw Spanish priests with kind eyes helping to conceal precious objects, saw a ceremony performed under a specific alignment of stars. "It's a calendar," Makia announced suddenly, "and a map. When the counting stick is placed across the tablet at different angles, it points to different locations. And according to these markings," he indicated a series of symbols, "it was meant to be found now." "What do you mean?" Nali asked. "The star patterns indicated here only align in this specific way, once every 70 years. The last alignment would have been in 1858, during the time of greatest threat to our people. The next is—" "Now," whispered Kanti, "this year." A shout from above interrupted them. "Mama, come quick!" It was Ayana's voice, tight with fear. They hurried up to find Elder Tomo collapsed on the ground, his breathing labored, face contorted in pain. "He touched something in the main chamber," Ayana explained frantically. "A small metal box. He opened it, and then just fell." Kanti knelt beside the stricken elder, examining him with practiced eyes. "Poison," she declared, "ancient and powerful." While she worked to treat him with herbs from her medicine bag, Nali returned to the main chamber and found the boxen ornate silver container with Spanish crosses and Apache symbols intertwined. Inside was nothing but a fine, greenish powder. "A trap," Makia said grimly when she described it, "to protect the vault from those not meant to access it." By dawn, Tomo's condition had stabilized, though he remained unconscious. The other elders had made progress deciphering the tablet and counting stick. "The vault is not just a hiding place," Makia explained to Nali and her children. "It's a test. According to what we've translated, the Spanish priests and our ancestors created this chamber, and others like Ito preserve both cultures' most sacred objects during a time of great danger." "But why here?" Keme asked. "Because this land sits at the intersection of ancient pathways, both physical trails and spiritual lines, that our people have always known about. The Spanish called them Li lines, places where the earth's power runs close to the surface." Kanti joined them, wiping her hands after tending to Tomo. The counting stick and tablet together reveal that the main chamber is only an antechamber. The true vault lies elsewhere, its entrance revealed only when specific stars align with specific landmarks. "When?" Nali asked. "The summer solstice," Makia replied. 5 days from now." Nali felt the weight of understanding settle upon her. "That's why old Joseph sold me this land," she whispered. "He knew." Makia nodded. "The legends speak of the widow who trades life for life, one who would give up living creatures for seemingly dead land, only to bring forth its hidden life." "I traded my horses," Nali said. "And now you must complete the task for which you were chosen," Kanti said solemnly, "before the others discover what we have learned." A vehicle's approach announced Agent Reynolds' arrival. The elders quickly dispersed, taking the counting stick with them. The game of secrets and revelations was about to become far more dangerous. Agent Reynolds established himself in a tent near the farmhouse, his presence a constant reminder of the government's claim. He maintained a pretense of professional courtesy, but his eyes missed nothing. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he would say whenever Nali questioned his intrusions, preserving history for future generations. Nali allowed him limited access to the main chamber, but kept the passage to the second room concealed. The elders had taken the counting stick and most of the deciphered information with them, leaving Nali with instructions to maintain the appearance of cooperation while revealing as little as possible. On the third morning of Reynolds' observation, Ayana burst into the kitchen, her face pale. "Mama, Tarak's gone." A frantic search of the property yielded nothing. Keem found small footprints leading toward the road, alongside larger boot prints. "Someone took him," he said grimly. Moments later, a farm boy from a neighboring property arrived on horseback with an envelope. Inside was a brief note and a small object wrapped in cloth. "We have the boy. Bring the tablet and map to the old mining office by sundown. Come alone or he dies." The cloth contained a silver button from Tarak's shirt. Nali's hands trembled as she read the note. "Who delivered this?" she demanded. "A man in town paid me to bring it," the boy replied nervously. "Said it was urgent family business." After the boy left, Reynolds approached. "Problem, Mrs. Strongheart?" Nali tucked the note away. "Nothing that concerns you." "Everything on this property concerns me," he countered smoothly, "including suspicious messages." Before she could respond, Sheriff Blackwood rode up. His expression was grim as he dismounted. "Mrs. Strongheart, I came as soon as I heard." He glanced at Reynolds, then back to Nali. "Whitman's been asking around town about your boy, describing him to shopkeepers, offering money for information about his habits." "The professor?" Reynolds asked, suddenly alert. "The same," Blackwood confirmed. "And he's been seen meeting with Weller several times. They've hired some rough men at locals." Nali made her decision. "Sheriff, my son is missing. We believe he's been taken to the old mining office." As Blackwood organized a search party, Nali retrieved the stone tablet from its hiding place. If necessary, she would trade it for Tarak artifacts could be replaced. Her child could not. While preparing to leave, she discovered something disturbing in the main chambera. Small wooden box had been pried open, its contents missing. Inside had been a ceremonial dagger, according to Elder Macia's inventory, a Spanish weapon adopted by Apache warriors, its blade reportedly treated with a potent mixture of herbs that could paralyze or kill. Reynolds denied knowledge of the missing dagger, but his eyes betrayed him. The game had suddenly become deadly. Sheriff Blackwood returned with 5 deputized men. "The mining office has been abandoned for years, but there's been activity there recently. Smoke from the chimney, fresh wagon tracks." "I'm coming with you," Reynolds insisted. "This is county business," Blackwood replied. "A federal agent has been stationed on this property to prevent exactly this, the theft and trafficking of protected artifacts." Reynolds' hand moved to his holstered gun. "I will accompany your party, Sheriff." As they prepared to depart, riders appeared on the horizon, Elder Macia and several Apache men, including Chayton. "We received word," Macia said simply, dismounting with difficulty. Within the hour, they had formulated a plan. The sheriff would approach the mining office directly, while Chayton led Apache warriors through the surrounding hills. Nali, despite protests, insisted on being present. "He's my son," she said firmly, "and I have what they want." As dusk approached, they gathered on a ridge overlooking the mining officer cluster of weathered buildings from a copper operation abandoned decades earlier. Smoke rose from the main structure, and 2 armed men patrolled outside. Reynolds studied the scene through binoculars. "There's Whitman, by the window," he murmured, "but no sign of Weller." "He wouldn't dirty his hands directly," the sheriff said. "Too much at stake for his reputation." Nali clutched the medicine pouch at her throat, praying for her son's safety. The tablet was wrapped in her shawl, ready to be surrendered if necessary. But something told her the exchange wouldn't be simple. "There's movement inside," Reynolds reported. "I can see the boy. He appears unharmed." Thank the spirits, Nali breathed. And something else. Reynolds lowered the binoculars, his expression troubled. They have excavation equipment, professional tools. Whatever they're planning goes beyond simple theft. The sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in fiery hues. Time had run out. As they prepared to move in, Nali spotted something glinting in Reynolds' coat, the missing ceremonial dagger. Her blood ran cold. The agent wasn't just an observer. He was part of whatever conspiracy had targeted her land and, now, her son. The hunt was closing in from all sides, and Nali was caught in the middle. The abandoned mining office smelled of dust and mildew, its wooden floors creaking with every movement. Tarak sat on a rickety chair in what had once been the supervisor's office, his small wrists bound with rope. Despite his fear, he maintained the stoic expression his father had taught him. A warrior does not show weakness to enemies. "Your mother should be receiving our message about now," Professor Whitman said, adjusting his spectacles as he studied a map spread across the desk. "I do apologize for the dramatics, young man, but adults can be so unreasonable about sharing important discoveries." Tarak remained silent, his dark eyes following the professor's movements. Two men with guns stood guard outside the door. Through the grimy window, he could see three more patrolling the perimeter. "You know," Whitman continued conversationally, "your ancestors were quite brilliant. The way they collaborated with those Spanish priests, creating a network of hidden chambers throughout the territory." He tapped the map. "Your mother's farm is just one node in a much larger design. But it's the key, the cornerstone, that unlocks the rest." Tarak's hand slipped into his pocket, finding reassurance in the small painted stones Elder Makia had given him days earlier. Teaching stones, the elder had called them each, one painted with symbols representing Apache stories and wisdom. Tarak had been carrying them everywhere since. "Are you hungry?" Whitman asked suddenly, his tone almost kindly. "I could have my associates bring something." "No," Tarak replied, his first words since being captured that morning while collecting eggs from the chicken coop. "Brave boy," Whitman said with something like admiration. "Like your mother. She's quite remarkable, you know, figuring out in weeks what historians have sought for decades." A commotion outside drew the professor to the window. A rider approached a man in a worn denim jacket and cowboy hat. One of the guards escorted him inside. "You said this would be simple," the newcomer said as he entered the office. "Now the whole county's looking for the boy." "Calm yourself, Jim," Whitman replied. "Everything's proceeding according to plan. Once we have the tablet and the map, we'll release the child unharmed." The man named Jim seemed unconvinced. "Weller's getting nervous. Says the sheriff's deputized half the town." "Weller should concern himself with financing, not field operations," Whitman snapped. "Now, make yourself useful and check our perimeter again." When they were alone once more, Whitman turned back to Tarak. "Your mother will be here soon. When she arrives, I need you to tell her that I've treated you well. Can you do that?" Tarak studied the professor's face. There was something unsettling in the man's gentle tonia, falseness that reminded the boy of stories his father had told about coyotes luring prey. "My mother says lying brings bad spirits," Tarak replied carefully. Whitman laughed. "Charming. Well, I haven't mistreated you, have I? No harm in saying so." When the professor stepped out to confer with his men, Tarak quickly pulled the teaching stones from his pocket. There were 5 of them, each bearing different symbols. His grandmother had taught him their meanings: wisdom, protection, direction, warning, and escape. The stone marked with escape showed a lizard slipping between rocks. Tarak glanced around the office. The back wall had a small vent near the floor, covered with a rusted grate. It might be large enough for a small boy to squeeze through. He used the stones to mark a trail. Only Apache eyes would recognize placing the direction stone on the windowsill pointing east, the warning stone by the door, and the protection stone beneath his chair. The wisdom stone he kept in his hand, drawing strength from its smooth surface. Voices outside indicated Jim's return. Saw dust rising from the south ridge. Could be nothing. Could be... "Take no chances," Whitman interrupted. "Double the guards on the south approach." Tarak worked quickly on his bonds while they were distracted, using a technique Kim had taught him for escaping knots. As the rope loosened, he heard hoofbeats approaching. "Rider coming in," called one of the guards. "It's a woman alone." Tarak's heart raced. His mother had come for him, just as he knew she would. But something told him Whitman had no intention of honoring any exchange. The guard named Jim entered, hauling Tarak roughly to his feet. "Come on, kid, time to see your mama." As they led him out, Tarak dropped the escape stone by the officer's back wall, a message, should any of his people find it, that he had seen another way out. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the mining yard. Nali approached on horseback, alone as instructed, something wrapped in a shawl clutched to her chest. Her eyes found Tarak's immediately, relief washing over her face at seeing him unharmed. But behind her, on the ridge overlooking the mining office, Tarak spotted movement, the briefest flash of light reflecting off metal. Help was closer than Whitman realized. He slipped the wisdom stone into his palm, squeezing it tightly. The old stories taught that patience was a hunter's greatest weapon. He would wait for his moment. As Nali approached the mining complex alone, the rest of their rescue party took positions in the surrounding hills. Sheriff Blackwood and 2 deputies circled wide to cover the north approach, while Chayton led 4 Apache men around to the eastern ridge. Keme had insisted on joining Chayton's group, despite his mother's protests. "I won't sit back while my brother is in danger," he had said, strapping his father's hunting knife to his belt. Reynolds had disappeared during their planning, confirming Nali's suspicions about his true allegiance. She had shared her discovery of the missing dagger with Sheriff Blackwood, who added it to his growing list of the agent's suspicious activities. "That man's no more a government agent than I'm the King of England," Blackwood had muttered. Now, as dusk settled over the desert, Chayton led Keem and the others through a dry wash that provided cover as they approached the mining complex from behind. The older man moved with the practiced stealth of a warrior, his time in the white man's army having done nothing to diminish his Apache hunting skills. "Look there," Chayton whispered, pointing to a small outbuilding behind the main office. 2 guards, both armed. "More than Whitman would need just to hold a child," one of the other men noted. "They're expecting trouble," Keme said. "And we'll give it to them," Chayton replied grimly. "But first, we need a distraction." Back at the farm, Ayana had been left in Elder Makia's care, along with a small contingent of women and older men from the settlement. They had gathered in the farmyard, performing a blessing ceremony for Tarak's safe return. While searching for extra ammunition in the barn, Ayana discovered a small wooden box wedged behind a support beam. Inside was an object that made her gasp, a wooden whistle carved in the shape of a hawk, decorated with faded paint and feathers. "A war whistle," Elder Makia explained when she brought it to him. "Used by our warriors to signal across great distances. The sound carries for miles in the desert air." Ayana clutched it tightly. "Can we use it to help Tarak?" Makia considered this, then nodded slowly. "It would be fitting. This whistle bears your family's markings. It may have belonged to your ancestors who once guarded this land." He instructed Ayana how to use it properly, warning that its sound would be heard by everyone in the area, friend and foe alike. "We will coordinate with Sheriff Blackwood," Makia decided. "When the moment comes for action, the whistle will signal all our forces to move at once." The old man sent a young rider to deliver this plan to the sheriff. Then he turned to the remaining Apache people gathered at the farm. "Tonight, we fight as our ancestors did," he told them. "Not just for a child, but for our heritage. Prepare yourselves." The women mixed war paint, using traditional pigments: red ochre, white clay, and charcoal. The men sharpened knives and tested bowstrings. Modern weapons would be their primary tools, but ancient ways would guide their hearts. Ayana took a position at the highest point of the farmhouse roof, the war whistle hanging around her neck on a leather cord. From there, she could see the distant mining complex and the approaching riders from town. "Someone else is coming," she called down to Elder Makia. Through borrowed binoculars, she made out Harrison Weller leading a group of at least 10 men, all armed, all riding hard toward the mining office. "He means to take whatever Whitman finds," Makia said grimly when she reported this. "The banker has shown his true face at last." Night fell completely, the desert cooling rapidly under a star-filled sky. At the mining complex, Nali stood before Professor Whitman, her face a mask of controlled fury as she saw her son bound beside him. "I've brought what you asked for," she said, unwrapping the stone tablet. Whitman's eyes gleamed with undisguised avarice. "Magnificent," he breathed, reaching for it. Nali pulled it back. "My son first." A cruel smile twisted the professor's scholarly features. "I'm afraid the terms have changed, Mrs. Strongheart. I'll need more than just the tablet. I'll need you to guide us to the main chamber, one that will be revealed at the solstice." From her hidden position on the eastern ridge, Ayana saw the confrontation unfolding. Below her, Chaitan and Keme were positioning themselves for the approach. The sheriff's men were visible as shadows moving along the northern perimeter. And in the distance, dust, rising in the moonlight, revealed Weller's approaching force. All the pieces were in motion. Ayana raised the war whistle to her lips, waiting for the signal from Elder Makia that would unleash the night's violence. In her other hand, she clutched her own set of teaching stones, silently repeating the protection prayers her grandmother had taught her. Tonight, the old ways and the new would merge in defense of family and heritage. The standoff at the mining office grew tenser by the moment. Nali clutched the stone tablet, her eyes never leaving her son's face. "I know nothing about a chamber that appears at the solstice," she lied smoothly. "This tablet is all we found." Professor Whitman's scholarly demeanor had completely vanished, replaced by a cold calculation that was far more frightening. "Miss Strongheart, I've spent 20 years researching the legends of this region. The Spanish journals explicitly mention a vault that appears only when certain stars align with the landscape." From his position beside Whitman, Tarak caught his mother's eye and subtly touched his pocket. Nali recognized the gesture he was indicating the teaching stones. Something about them was important. "I'll examine your tablet here," Whitman continued, "and then you'll both accompany us back to your farm." "And if I refuse?" The professor smiled thinly. "I don't think you will." At that moment, Sheriff Blackwood's voice boomed from the darkness. "Professor Whitman, this is Sheriff Blackwood. You're surrounded. Release the boy and come out with your hands up." Chaos erupted instantly. Whitman's men opened fire toward the sheriff's position. The professor grabbed Tarak, dragging him back into the office building, while two guards pushed Nali after them. On the eastern ridge, Ayana received the signal from Elder Makia. She raised the war whistle to her lips and blew with all her strength. The sound that emerged was unlike anything she'd ever heard, a piercing, undulating cry that seemed to come from the desert itself, echoing across the landscape. Chaitan and his men burst from cover, moving swiftly toward the rear of the complex. Keem separated from the group, heading for a small side window he'd spotted earlier. Inside, Whitman barricaded the office door. "Your timing is unfortunate, Mrs. Strongheart," he said, breathing heavily. "I'd hoped to conclude our business without violence." "You kidnapped my son," Nali replied coldly. "Violence was always your intention." The guard named Jim peered nervously through the window. "Professor, we've got Apache warriors out there, and I swear I heard a war cry." "Superstitious nonsense," Whitman snapped, though his hands trembled slightly as he examined the tablet. "Where's Reynolds? He was supposed to be here by now." As if summoned by his name, Agent Reynolds appeared at the back door, slipping inside and quickly securing it behind him. His government-issue suit was dusty, his expression grim. "Weller's coming with reinforcements," he reported. "But we have another problem. I recognize some of those Apache men. They're Great War veteran-trained soldiers." While the adult spoke, Tarak worked steadily at the ropes binding his wrists, using the technique Keem had taught him. The knots finally gave way, but he kept his hands positioned to appear still bound, waiting for the right moment. A soft tapping at the small rear window caught his attention. Tarak turned his head slightly and glimpsed his brother's face in the darkness. Outside, Kema had reached the window, using his hunting knife to carefully pry at the frame. Years of desert heat had warped the wood, making it possible to create a gap just wide enough for Tarak to squeeze through if he could reach it. The situation grew more complicated when a cloud of dust on the horizon announced Weller's approaching force. Sheriff Blackwood and his deputies were now caught between Whitman's men and the banker's approaching group. In the confusion, a figure slipped away from Whitman's guards, the man called Jim. He'd apparently decided his employer's plan was doomed and was making his escape. As he rounded the back of the building, he came face to face with Chaitin. There was a brief moment of recognition. Both men had served in France during the Great War, though on different sides of the segregated forces. "You don't want this fight," Chaitin said quietly. Jim hesitated, then nodded. "Back window's your best bet." The professors focused on that tablet, not watching the boy too closely. Inside, Reynolds was growing increasingly agitated. "We need to move now, Professor. Take the tablet and the woman, we can study them elsewhere. And leave behind what's buried at her farm." Whitman shook his head. "Impossible." While they argued, Nali inched closer to her son. "Be ready," she whispered. Suddenly, the air filled with a pungent, sweet smoke. Through the rear window, Kimei had pushed a small leather pouch's grandmother's medicine bag, filled with herbs that, when burned, created a thick, disorienting smoke. Reynolds and Whitman began coughing and rubbing their eyes. Tarak seized the moment, breaking free from his seemingly bound position and darting toward the window where Kimei waited. "The boy!" Reynolds shouted, lunging after him. Nali thrust herself between the agent and her son, allowing Tarak to reach the window. Kimei's hands appeared, grabbing his brother and pulling him through the narrow opening to safety. Reynolds struck Nali, knocking her to the floor. The stone tablet clattered beside her as Whitman scrambled to recover it through the thickening smoke. Outside, the war whistle sounded again, Chaitin's signal that Tarak was safe. Now it was time to retrieve Nali. The reunion between Kimei and Tarak was brief but fierce, the brothers embracing in the shadow of the mining office, while gunfire continued to exchange between Sheriff Blackwood's men and Whitman's guards. "Where's Mother?" Tarak asked urgently. "Still inside," Kame replied, his face grim. "Chaitin's organizing the men to go in after her." The situation complicated further as Weller's group arrived, immediately opening fire on both Whitman's men and the sheriff's position. In the chaos, Whitman and Reynolds dragged Nali from the mining office toward a waiting automobile, the stone tablet secured in Reynolds' grip. "The tablet!" Tarak cried, pointing. But they could only watch as the vehicle sped away, kicking up dust in the moonlight. Its direction was clear: Nali's farm. "They're heading for the vault," Keme realized. "The sheriff can handle things here. We need to get back." The ride back to the farm was a desperate race. Chaitin had procured horses from Whitman's men, allowing them to cut across country rather than follow the winding road. Even so, the automobile had a head start. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the farm, they saw lights already moving around the property. Whitman's automobile was parked haphazardly beside the house, and several figures were gathered around the entrance to the vault. What they didn't expect to see was resistance. Elder Makia and the remaining Apache elders had formed a protective circle around the vault entrance, refusing to move, despite Reynolds' drawn gun. "This is federal authority," Reynolds was shouting as Kimei, Tarak and Chaitin approached stealthily. "Stand aside or face arrest." "You have no authority here," Elder Makia replied calmly. "Only lies and greed." Whitman still gripped Nali's arm, using her as a shield. "Tell them to move," he hissed in her ear, "or I can't guarantee their safety." "Professor," one of his men called urgently, "there's something above the entrance." All eyes turned to the wooden beam that spanned the top of the vault entrance. Mounted there, previously hidden by shadows, was a spear ancient in design, its shaft carved with protective symbols, its obsidian point gleaming in the lantern light. "The Guardian Spear," Elder Makia said, his voice carrying in the night air, "placed there by our ancestors as a warning to those who would enter with impure hearts." "Superstitious nonsense," Whitman scoffed, though uncertainty tinged his voice. From the darkness, Tarak raised the war whistle to his lips and blew. The eerie cry echoed across the property, startling everyone, including Reynolds, whose grip on his gun momentarily faltered. In that instant, Nali acted. She drove her elbow hard into Whitman's stomach, breaking free of his grasp and lunging toward the elders. Reynolds raised his gun, but Chaitin emerged from the shadows, tackling the false agent to the ground. Keme rushed forward, helping the elders pull his mother to safety as more Apache warriors appeared from the darkness, surrounding Whitman and his men. "This isn't over," Whitman snarled, backing toward the automobile. "Weller has 20 armed men who will be here any moment." As if summoned by his words, dust clouds appeared on the horizon, but it wasn't Weller. Sheriff Blackwood rode at the head of a group of deputies and townspeople, having successfully dealt with Whitman's men at the mining office. "Professor Whitman," the sheriff called, dismounting, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and a whole list of other charges I'll enjoy reading to you." Reynolds broke free from Chayton and ran for the vault entrance, clutching the stone tablet. "It's here. The entrance to the main chamber must be here." Before anyone could stop him, he reached up and yanked the Guardian's spear from its mounting. A low rumble shook the ground as decades of dust fell from the wooden supports around the vault entrance. "You fool," Elder Makia shouted. The spear was holding the old timbers in place. Reynolds paid no heed, rushing into the vault with Whitman close behind, both men driven by greed and obsession. The rumbling increased as Sheriff Blackwood ordered everyone back from the entrance. Nali gathered her children to her, watching as dust billowed from the vault entrance. The ground continued to shake, small at first, then with increasing intensity. "The ancestors protect what is theirs," Elder Makia said softly beside her. A great cloud of dust erupted from the entrance, followed by a thunderous crash. When the air cleared, they saw that the entire front section of the vault had collapsed, sealing the entrance completely. Reynolds and Whitman were trapped inside. Weller's men arrived to find Sheriff Blackwood and armed Apache warriors waiting. The banker took in the scene the collapsed vault, his co-conspirators nowhere to be seen, and the determined faces of those defending the farm. "This doesn't concern us," he announced to his men, wheeling his horse around. "There's nothing here worth dying for." As Weller's group departed, Nali approached the sealed entrance, the Guardian's spear now lying in the dirt where it had fallen. She picked it up, feeling its ancient power. "What happens now?" Keme asked. Nali looked at Elder Makia, who nodded knowingly. "Now," she said, "we wait for the solstice." 2 days passed. Sheriff Blackwood brought in men to try to dig through the collapsed entrance, but progress was painfully slow. The sounds of tapping from within gradually weakened, then ceased entirely. Whether Whitman and Reynolds had found another way out or succumbed to their entombment, no one could say. The solstice was now just 1 day away. Elder Makia and the other tribal elders remained at the farm, preparing for whatever would be revealed when the stars aligned. Using the counting stick and their partial translations of the tablet, which remained trapped inside with Reynolds, they determined that sunrise on the solstice was the critical moment. "But the entrance is sealed," Kame pointed out as they discussed their plans. "Even if there is another chamber, how can we access it?" "The tablet and counting stick speak of multiple entrances," Elder Makia explained. "The one we found was merely the most obvious, created later, perhaps by those who didn't fully understand the original design." That evening, Nali found herself drawn to the ridge east of the farmhouse. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, she felt a strange, tingling sensation, the same feeling she'd experienced when handling the artifacts in the vault. The visions came again, stronger than before. She saw ancient hands carving symbols into stone, Apache and Spanish working side by side. She saw ceremonial objects being carefully placed in hidden recesses. And most clearly, she saw a natural rock formation on her property, a cluster of 3 boulders that the setting sun now illuminated with golden light. "There," she whispered, pointing. "That's where we need to be tomorrow at dawn." The next morning, before first light, a solemn procession made its way to the 3 standing rocks. Nali led the way, carrying the Guardian's spear. Behind her came Elder Makia and the other elders, followed by her children and members of the Apache community. Sheriff Blackwood stood respectfully at the back, there to witness but not interfere. As the first rays of the solstice sun crested the eastern mountains, they struck the tallest of the 3 rocks at a precise angle. The light reflected between the stones, eventually illuminating a small opening at their base that had been invisible in normal light. "The true entrance," Elder Makia breathed. The opening was barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. Nali went first, followed by Keme, while the others waited outside. They found themselves in a narrow, natural tunnel that sloped gently downward. The walls were smooth, worn by ancient waters that had long since vanished. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a chamber that took their breath away. Unlike the rough-hewn vault they had discovered earlier, this chamber was a natural cave that had been carefully enhanced. The walls were covered with paintings, some clearly ancient Apache symbols, others in the distinctive style of Spanish religious art, the two traditions intermingling in a way neither culture would have permitted above ground. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and upon it rested a mask carved from wood and inlaid with shell, turquoise, and copper. The face depicted was neither fully Apache nor Spanish, but something that seemed to transcend both cultures. "The spirit mask," Nali whispered, approaching it cautiously. Behind her, Keme examined the chamber. "Mother, look, there are alcoves all around, filled with objects." Each recess contained carefully preserved items, Apache ceremonial objects, Spanish religious artifacts, and items that appeared to be a deliberate fusion of both traditions. The wealth represented was staggering: gold, silver, precious stones, but it was the cultural and spiritual significance that truly made the collection priceless. A noise from the tunnel announced new arrivals: Elder Makia, squeezing through with difficulty, followed by Ayana and Tarak. "The ancestors have deemed you worthy," Makia said to Nali. "They have revealed their greatest treasure to you." Nali approached the spirit mask cautiously. "What is it for?" "Our legends speak of a mask that allows the wearer to communicate with ancestors," Makia explained. "It was used in times of great decision, when the people needed guidance." Something compelled Nali to reach for it. As her fingers touched the ancient wood, the visions returned, but now they were conversations. She heard voices from the past, explaining why this chamber had been created, what it contained, and what was expected of those who found it. "They didn't hide these things because they were valuable," she said slowly, understanding dawning. "They hid them because they were sacred, too sacred to be destroyed in the conflicts between our peoples. This place isn't about treasure, it's about preservation, about keeping knowledge and tradition alive through dark times." A sudden rumble shook the chamber. Dust and small stones showered from the ceiling. "Something's happening," Keme said urgently. "The whole structure could be unstable." As if triggered by Nali's understanding, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a previously hidden tunnel sloping upward. "An escape route," Elder Makia realized. "But it means—" Before he could finish, another, louder rumble shook the chamber. The spirit mask on the altar began to glow with an inner light that illuminated the entire space. "We need to leave," Nali said, understanding the message she was receiving. Now. The escape tunnel led them upward through the earth, emerging surprisingly far from where they had entered, nearly a quarter mile from the three standing rocks, in a dry wash that cut across Nali's property. As the last of them scrambled out, a deep rumbling shook the ground. In the distance, they watched as the original vault entrance collapsed entirely, sending up a cloud of dust visible for miles. "The ancestors have reclaimed their sanctuary," Elder Makia said solemnly. Nali still held the spirit mask, having instinctively taken it from the altar before fleeing. In her other hand was a long wooden staff that had stood beside the altar, intricately carved, with symbols of justice and wisdom, inlaid with copper and turquoise. The law stick, Makia identified it, used by tribal judges to make decisions that would affect the entire community. When they returned to the farmhouse, they found Sheriff Blackwood coordinating a group of men who were frantically digging at the collapsed vault entrance. "We heard tapping again," he explained. "Whitman or Reynolds are both. They're still alive in there." The rescue effort continued throughout the day, but progress was slow. By sunset, they had managed to create an opening large enough for a man to squeeze through. Muffled cries for help could now be clearly heard. "It's Reynolds," the sheriff confirmed after calling into the hole. "Says he's injured but alive. No sign of Whitman." As night fell, they finally extracted the government agent, filthy, dehydrated, and with a badly broken leg. Reynolds had survived by finding a pocket of air when the main chamber collapsed. Whitman, he reported between gulps of water, had pushed deeper into the collapsing structure, convinced there must be another way to the treasure. He hadn't returned. The next morning, government officials arrived from Phoenix, real ones this time, summoned by Sheriff Blackwood. They took Reynolds into custody after confirming he was no federal agent but a well-known artifact smuggler who had been impersonating government officials for years. More surprising was the arrival of a representative from the Smithsonian Institution, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, who had been tracking Reynolds's activities for months. "The man has stolen countless irreplaceable artifacts from tribal lands across the Southwest," she explained. "We've been building a case against him and his network of collectors." 2 weeks later, Nali found herself once again in the county courthouse, but under very different circumstances. A special hearing had been convened to determine the disposition of the artifacts recovered from the collapsed vault, as well as the spirit mask and other items they had managed to remove from the hidden chamber before its collapse. The courtroom was packed government representatives, museum officials, tribal leaders from across the region, and curious townspeople. Judge Matthews presided, looking uncomfortable with the attention the case had drawn. When it was Nali's turn to speak, she approached the bench carrying the law stick. A murmur ran through the crowd, the Apache observers recognizing its significance. "Your Honor," she began, "these artifacts were hidden by my ancestors and their Spanish allies to preserve them during a time of great conflict. They were not abandoned or discarded, they were protected, with the intention that they would someday be reclaimed by those who understood their true value." She held up the law stick. "This represents justice as my people have understood it for centuries, not as ownership of objects, but as responsibility to preserve knowledge and wisdom for future generations." The debate that followed was lengthy and complex. Government attorneys argued that the artifacts were national treasures that belonged in museums. Private interests, represented by Harrison Weller's lawyers, claimed the property rights superseded cultural considerations. But the testimony that seemed to sway Judge Matthews came from an unexpected source. Collins, the librarian, who had uncovered additional documents proving that the land had been designated as a protected Apache cultural site in the original territorial charters, a designation that had been deliberately obscured in later land records. As the judge retired to consider his ruling, Nali gathered with her family and the tribal elders in the courthouse square. Using the law stick in the traditional manner, they conducted their own deliberation about what should happen to the artifacts, especially those, like the spirit mask, that held deep cultural significance. "Our people have lost so much," one elder argued. "These objects belong with us, hidden if necessary." "But hidden treasures benefit no one," countered another. "Our children need to see their heritage, to learn from it." As the appointed holder of the law stick, Nali listened to all perspectives before speaking. "What if there is another way?" she suggested. "A way that honors both the need for preservation and the sharing of knowledge." When Judge Matthews finally delivered his ruling, it reflected the wisdom of both legal traditions. The artifacts would not be seized by the government, nor would they be subject to private ownership. Instead, a protected cultural site would be established on Nali's land, managed by a tribal trust, where the objects could be properly preserved while remaining in their traditional context. "The greatest treasures," Nali told her children as they returned to the farm that evening, "are those that grow when shared, not those locked away in darkness." 1 year later, Nali stood on her porch, watching visitors make their way along the carefully marked path to the newly constructed cultural center. What had once been a barren, struggling farm had transformed into a place of learning and preservation. The collapsed vault had been partially excavated under the supervision of tribal elders and respectful archaeologists. A simple structure now protected the entrance, with carefully designed exhibits explaining the unique historical alliance between Apache guardians and Spanish priests who had worked together to preserve their respective cultural treasures. "Mama!" Tarak called, running up the path. At 9, he had grown taller, his face losing some of its childish roundness. "The busload of students from Phoenix just arrived. Elder Makia says it's my turn to tell the story." Nali smiled, watching her youngest son race back to the cultural center. He had developed a gift for storytelling, captivating visitors with the tale of their discovery, though. He always emphasized the spiritual significance rather than the gold and silver that had so obsessed Whitman and Reynolds. Inside the farmhouse, expanded with a proper second bedroom and a sturdy roof, Ayana sat at a desk covered with papers and drawings. At 13, she had appointed herself the family historian, meticulously documenting every artifact and its significance. "I found something amazing," she announced as Nali entered. "The Smithsonian sent these copies from their archives." She held up photographs of a wax cylinderone of the earliest recording devices, dating from the 1890s. Accompanying notes explained that it contained Apache stories recorded by an ethnographer who had visited the region. "And look at the name of the storyteller," Ayana said excitedly, pointing to a handwritten note. Nali peered at it, her breath catching. "Nali Strongheart, my grandfather." "Dr. Hayes says they can make a copy of the recording for us," Ayana explained. "We could actually hear great-grandfather's voice." The thought was overwhelming. Direct connection to ancestors known only through stories and faded photographs. Outside, more visitors arrived. The cultural center had become a respected destination, drawing students, researchers, and tourists interested in the unique history of cooperation between cultures that the site represented. The modest admission fees, along with grants from historical preservation societies, had brought financial stability to Nali's family and employment opportunities for many in the Apache community. Keme, now 17, had developed an interest in archaeology, studying under professionals who recognized the value of indigenous perspectives in their field. He had been accepted to university for the following year, the first in their family to pursue higher education. As evening approached and the visitors departed, the family gathered with Elder Makia and other community members for a celebratory meal. 1 year since the judge's ruling, and the transformation was remarkable. "I have news," Sheriff Blackwood announced as he joined them. Now retired, he had become a steadfast ally and friend. They found Whitman's remains. A solemn silence fell. Workers extending the county road had discovered a body in a remote area miles from the farm identified as Professor Whitman by papers in his possession. He had apparently found another exit from the collapsing chamber, only to become lost in the desert. "He chose greed over wisdom," Elder Makia said quietly. "The desert is unforgiving of such choices." After dinner, as twilight softened the landscape, Nali walked to the small garden that now flourished beside the new well they had properly drilled. Water, the original quest that had led to all that followed, now flowed abundantly, supporting crops and sustaining life. She touched the medicine pouch at her throat, the original one she had carried, now joined by the ancient one found on the property. Together, they symbolized the connection between past and future that she had been entrusted to maintain. From the ridge came the sound of the war whistlano, used not for battle, but to signal the beginning of evening ceremonies. Tarak had earned the honor of sounding it, his clear notes carrying across land that had once been barren but now teemed with purpose and possibility. 3 horses, Nali murmured to herself, remembering what she had traded for this property. The memory brought not regret, but a sense of completion, a circle closed, a prophecy fulfilled. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, she gazed upward at the same constellations that had guided her ancestors. The greatest treasure, she had learned, was not gold or silver, but legacy stories, knowledge and traditions, passed from one generation to the next. On her farm, her people's land, that legacy now flowed as surely as the water from the desert depths, nourishing all who came to drink from its wisdom.